Glass gem corn. In 1903, you could buy seeds for 307 varieties of sweet corn. Today, only 12 survive. This is the story of America's greatest agricultural crime, and it starts with corn that looked like stained glass windows, each kernel a different jewel tone catching the light. Glass gem corn was the life's work of Carl Barnes, a part Cherokee farmer from Oklahoma who spent decades collecting and preserving native corn varieties that were disappearing from tribal communities. Each ear was a masterpiece of nature, with kernels ranging from deep purple and burgundy to bright orange, yellow, and translucent blues. The colors weren't just beautiful, they told stories of genetic diversity that stretched back centuries. But as industrial agriculture standardized corn into uniform yellow varieties for easier processing and shipping, these rainbow ears became relics. Seed companies systematically eliminated varieties that didn't fit their profit model. Glass gem corn still exists, but only in the hands of dedicated seed savers, fighting against corporate control of our food supply. Purple top turnips. Every farm had a purple top turnip patch, and come winter, families counted on them like money in the bank. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see the modern grocery store forever. These weren't the bitter, woody turnips most people remember from school cafeterias, but sweet, tender roots that could feed a family through the coldest months. Purple top turnips were the ultimate survival food. The bulbous white roots, crowned with that distinctive purple shoulder, stored perfectly in root cellars for months without refrigeration. But their real genius was versatility. Families ate the sweet, mild roots mashed, roasted, or thrown into stews, while the nutritious greens fed both people and livestock. A single turnip patch could produce food from early summer greens all the way through stored winter roots. But supermarket chains and big agriculture had other plans. They wanted vegetables that shipped well and looked identical, not varieties that actually fed people. Today, most people wouldn't recognize a purple top turnip if they saw one, exactly as the food industry intended. Moon and Stars watermelon. A watermelon covered in yellow spots that looked like constellations scattered across a dark green night sky. The Moon and Stars watermelon wasn't just beautiful, it was nearly lost forever until one family fought the seed companies to save it from extinction. This Russian heirloom arrived in America in the early 1900s, named for the large yellow spots and smaller speckles that decorated its dark skin. Even the leaves had yellow markings, making the entire plant look otherworldly. But the real magic was inside. The deep red flesh was sweeter and more flavorful than any modern watermelon, with a rich, complex taste that today's varieties can't match. By the 1980s, Moon and Stars had virtually disappeared. Commercial growers preferred uniform melons that shipped well and looked consistent in stores. The variety was considered extinct until seed saver Merlin Needens found it growing in his father's Missouri garden. What happened next will shock you about how our food system really works. Fish pepper. In the Chesapeake Bay, there was a pepper so tied to the oyster houses that it nearly vanished with them. But the seed companies don't want you to know this next fact. The fish pepper wasn't just another hot pepper. It was a living piece of African-American culinary history that disappeared as corporate agriculture erased cultural food traditions. These small, fiery peppers were the secret weapon of African-American oyster shuckers who worked the docks around Baltimore. The peppers had distinctive variegated leaves, streaked with cream and green, and produced hot, flavorful pods, perfect for seasoning the fresh oysters and fish that came off the boats. Each plant was as beautiful as it was useful, with ornamental foliage that made gardens look like they were painted with brushstrokes. As the Chesapeake oyster industry declined and the old dock communities scattered, the fish pepper nearly disappeared completely. This wasn't an accident. It was part of a systematic elimination of regional food varieties that didn't serve industrial interests. Today, a few dedicated seed savers are bringing it back, fighting to preserve what corporate agriculture tried to destroy. Tennis ball lettuce. Before iceberg dominated every salad bowl, there was a lettuce that looked exactly like its name. Tennis ball lettuce formed perfect, compact heads about the size of a tennis ball, crisp and sweet enough to make modern lettuce taste like water. But what happened to this variety reveals the dark truth about how we lost control of our food. These little green orbs were the perfect size for a small family meal, and unlike the sprawling leaf lettuces that bolt in summer heat, tennis ball varieties could handle warm weather without turning bitter. The heads were dense and crunchy, with tender inner leaves that had a buttery flavor you just don't find in supermarket lettuce. Gardeners loved them because they took up minimal space and produced consistently. But commercial farming had other plans. They focused on varieties that could travel cross-country without wilting, prioritizing shelf life over nutrition and taste. Iceberg could survive long shipping and looked impressive in grocery stores, even if it lacked any real nutritional value. The seed companies made sure tennis ball lettuce disappeared from catalogs, forcing consumers to accept inferior substitutes. Dragon tongue beans. With purple streaks running down cream-colored pods, these beans looked mythical, like something that belonged in a fairy tale garden rather than a vegetable patch. Dragon tongue beans were as delicious as they were beautiful, but their striking appearance couldn't save them from the industrial food system's war on diversity. This Dutch heirloom produced flat, wide pods, striped with deep purple markings that really did resemble a dragon's tongue. The beans were tender and stringless, with a nutty, complex flavor that made regular green beans taste bland by comparison. They were perfect for eating fresh, and the purple markings made them a conversation starter at any dinner table. But commercial bean production had no room for beauty or flavor. They favored uniform green varieties that looked consistent and familiar to consumers who had been trained to expect boring food. Dragon tongue beans were too exotic, too unusual for mass market appeal. The purple stripes also faded when cooked, which gave the food industry an excuse to eliminate them entirely. White albino beets. Not all beets were red. Some were pure white, sweet as sugar, and perfect for pickling without staining everything in sight. White albino beets were the clean, elegant cousin of the messy red beet. But somewhere along the way, big agriculture decided we didn't deserve choices. These pale, almost translucent roots had all the earthy sweetness of red beets without the muddy, metallic taste that turned so many people away from beets entirely. They were perfect for cooking because they didn't bleed red juice all over cutting boards, hands, and other vegetables. White beets could be roasted, pickled, or grated raw into salads without turning everything pink. But red beets dominated the market through aggressive marketing that convinced people color meant nutrition. White beets looked too ordinary to capture attention in a food system designed around visual manipulation rather than actual quality. Mortgage lifter tomato. This tomato was so legendary, it supposedly paid off a man's mortgage during the Great Depression. But wait until you hear how the seed industry destroyed varieties like this to control the market. The mortgage lifter wasn't just big, it was enormous, with individual fruits weighing up to 4 pounds and flavor so incredible that people drove from neighboring states to buy them. The story goes that M.C. Biles, a mechanic from West Virginia, developed this variety by cross-pollinating the largest tomatoes he could find. He sold seedlings for $1 each, a fortune during the Depression, and paid off his $6,000 mortgage in just 6 years. The tomatoes were massive, meaty, and had low acidity, making them perfect for fresh eating and canning. But commercial growers couldn't control tomatoes this good. They were too big for standard packaging, too delicate for mechanical harvesting, and too irregular for uniform processing. As agriculture industrialized, the seed companies made sure varieties like Mortgage Lifter became extinct, forcing farmers to buy their inferior but profitable hybrids instead. Purple carrots. Before orange carrots took over, most American gardens grew purple ones. These weren't some exotic novelty, but the original color that carrots had been for centuries before Dutch growers decided orange looked more appealing. What happened next shows how marketing can literally change the color of our food. Purple carrots weren't just different in color, they were different in flavor too. They had a deeper, richer taste with hints of spice that orange carrots lack, and they were packed with anthocyanins, the same antioxidants that make blueberries and red wine so healthy. The purple color came from the outside in, often with orange or yellow cores that created beautiful rings when sliced. But orange won the marketing battle through deliberate manipulation. Dutch growers in the 17th century developed orange varieties to honor the House of Orange, and the color became associated with quality and freshness through decades of propaganda. Purple carrots were systematically eliminated from seed catalogs, creating the illusion that orange was natural and purple was strange. Lazy wife beans. Despite the unfortunate name, these beans were a homemaker's dream. But here's what the seed companies won't tell you about why varieties like this disappeared. Lazy wife beans were completely stringless, snapped cleanly without any tough fibers, and could be eaten fresh or dried for winter storage. The name wasn't an insult, it was praise for how easy they made cooking. These climbing beans produced flat, wide pods that were tender enough to eat whole when young, but also developed plump, meaty beans inside that dried beautifully for winter soups and stews. A single planting gave you 2 crops in one, and the pods were so tender that preparing them took almost no work. No stringing, no tough pieces to cut away, just snap and cook. But the name became a weapon against the variety as marketing sensitivities changed. Seed companies used political correctness as an excuse to drop superior varieties, replacing them with inferior but more profitable hybrids. The beans that had once been prized for their convenience became casualties of corporate manipulation disguised as social progress. Cushaw squash. Shaped like a giant swan's neck, the Cushaw squash filled root cellars across America with its distinctive curved form and incredible keeping qualities. These weren't your typical round pumpkins, but elegant elongated squash that could feed a family all winter long, which is exactly why big agriculture wanted them gone. Cushaw squash came in several varieties, but all shared that characteristic curved neck and bulbous bottom end. The flesh was sweet and dense, perfect for pies, soups, and roasting, with a flavor that was more complex than modern butternut squash. But their real value was storage. A properly cured Cushaw could last 6 months or more in a cool, dry place, providing fresh vegetables deep into winter. Commercial growers couldn't profit from vegetables that lasted too long or fed families too well. They preferred smaller, more uniform squash that packed efficiently and spoiled quickly, forcing repeat purchases. The Cushaw's unusual shape made it perfect for families, but impossible for corporate food systems designed around waste and dependency. Kentucky Wonder Pole beans. These beans could climb so high, children used them as living jungle gyms by late summer. Kentucky Wonder Pole beans were the vertical gardening solution that fed America for generations, turning a small garden space into a bean-producing powerhouse that threatened corporate agriculture's control over food production. The vines could easily reach 10 feet or more, creating green walls of heart-shaped leaves and dangling bean pods. They produced continuously all season long, unlike bush beans that gave one big harvest and quit. The beans themselves were meaty and flavorful, perfect for fresh eating when young or drying for winter storage. Kids loved hiding in the bean teepees that formed naturally when the vines covered their supports. But modern gardening shifted toward varieties that created dependency rather than abundance. Bush beans took up more space, needed constant replanting, and gave smaller harvests that forced gardeners to buy more seeds. Commercial growers preferred varieties that could be machine harvested, eliminating jobs and concentrating power in fewer hands. Brandywine Tomato Pink. Beefsteak sized, and so flavorful that one bite could ruin you for store-bought tomatoes forever. The Brandywine tomato was the gold standard for taste, an Amish heirloom that proved what we lost when corporations took over our food supply. This is the variety that shows exactly what they stole from us. These large, irregular fruits had thin skin that bruised if you looked at them wrong, and they ripened unevenly with shoulders that stayed green while the bottom turned deep pink. But the flavor was extraordinary. rich, and complex, with perfect acid balance and intense tomato taste that modern varieties can't match. Each fruit was different, imperfect, and absolutely delicious. Commercial growers eliminated Brandywines not because they couldn't grow them, but because they couldn't control them. The thin skin meant they couldn't be shipped without damage. The irregular shape made them impossible to pack uniformly, and the incredible flavor made industrial tomatoes taste like cardboard. Varieties like Brandywine had to disappear for the modern food system to exist. White Wonder Cucumber. Imagine a cucumber so white it looked like it was carved from ivory, crisp and cool, without a hint of the bitterness that makes some people avoid cucumbers entirely. White Wonder cucumbers were the pale, perfect alternative that somehow got forgotten in favor of green, but their disappearance wasn't an accident. These unusual cucumbers had pure white skin and flesh, but they weren't lacking in anything except the ability to make seed companies rich. They were incredibly crisp, with a clean, refreshing taste that was milder and sweeter than green varieties. The white skin was tender enough to eat without peeling, and they stayed crisp longer after picking than most cucumbers. They also handled heat better, producing well into summer when other varieties started turning bitter. Green won the cucumber wars through deliberate market manipulation that convinced consumers white vegetables were inferior. People were trained to expect cucumbers to be green, and anything else seemed unnatural, exactly as the food industry intended. Black Krim Tomato. From the shores of the Black Sea came a tomato so dark it looked almost purple in the summer Sunday. The Black Krim tomato carried the complex flavors of its Russian homeland, rich and smoky, with a depth that modern tomatoes can only dream of achieving. But here's the most disturbing part about what we've lost. These weren't just dark red tomatoes, but fruits with deep purple-black shoulders that faded to dark red at the bottom, creating a gradient that looked like a sunset. The flavor was as complex as the color, with a rich, almost wine-like intensity and perfect balance of sweet and acid. Black Krims were brought to America by immigrants who couldn't bear to leave their favorite tomatoes behind, but the varieties gradually disappeared as families assimilated and lost touch with their gardening traditions. While we lost these 15 varieties, seed companies patented thousands of new ones that perform worse but cost more. They didn't just steal our heritage, they made us pay for what our grandparents got for free. The question is, what will you do about it?